Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the live stream. My name is Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Hope you all had a wonderful weekend. Welcome back. I should have adjusted my setup before I started, but I didn't. Welcome back to the live streams. It's another week of live streams. Yes, the new music, says Alex. It's true. I have a whole bank of music on here on this sound desk that I don't use. So that's one of them. No, you know what? I've actually got a soft spot for Battles. That was a track from Battles, their first album, which is the only album. That's right. You heard it here first. Modern Battles sucks. Braxton Era. You are correct. Yes, it is the Braxton Era of Battles. You know, great song, great album. Mirrored is the name of that album. Huge fan. It feels like I'm back doing my radio show. There's maybe a tidbit some of you didn't know. I actually had my own radio show for 5 years. Maybe that's where I picked up some of these skills of talking to a mic, and you just get used to the camera side of it, I guess. No one actually likes, when you first do live streams, no one actually really, I think, enjoys seeing themselves on. Whoa, almost tipped my dram over. There's too much tech on this table to spill whiskey. But you don't actually, I don't think you actually really enjoy seeing yourself on camera maybe the first time. Some people maybe don't care. But, there's that sort of like you hear your voice. I can hear my voice now, the feedback. And, you sort of get used to it very quickly, I think. Sort of adapt to it. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I want to talk about tonight was I got asked a few questions, thank you, Darren. Hope your weekend was fantastic as well. I know I certainly had a lovely weekend. So, that's what weekends are there for, to enjoy yourself. Tonight isn't so much a rant. It's a bit of a discussion, actually, about some of the things going on with what's sort of a theme, if you like, for the next Outturn. And I want to delve into one of those topics a bit tonight, but this is the first of two parts I'll do on this topic because I think this is really important. Because there's a lot to be said about timelines here. I should have named this video Timelines. Doesn't matter. We can call it whatever we like. So what I want to do is actually, I'm going to bring up my secondary screen in just a moment. One of the things that I was asked the most of, there is a bit of a rant, Alex. Bring the rant. You know what? I often use Mondays for, you're right, I often do use Mondays for my Monday rant. But I'll tell you what, I mean, there's not too much to rant about at the moment. There's so many good things at the moment that are just so enjoyable in whiskey, especially sharing it with you virtually at the very least, let alone being able to start getting some of our events back up and running, which I'll get to. I'm going to get to that. Trust me, I'm getting to that. Okay. What I want to do is I'm going to show you that cover one more time. Here is our front cover, which got all sorts of great feedback online when we released it today. That is the front cover for August Outturn Flavor Invasion. It's sort of looking, you can see there's a bit of robotic. There's a robot. There's a carrying a bottle of whiskey and a crate, a cask. I almost said a crate. It looks like a crate, doesn't it? A cask of whiskey, a modern cask, a futuristic cask of whiskey. Like steel and all blue and whatever, and it's got lights on the front, cool, and a crab landing on land with anyway. And there's a cigar there, there's a chili there, there's a watermelon. It's all the flavor. It's all the flavor that we like to talk about. An invasion of flavor on the senses with our new cluster of out of this world whiskeys. The reason why I think this is fun is because, like I say, there's not much to rant about in whiskey. There's parts of the whiskey trade. There's parts of there's some distilleries that could make me rant. There's things like that. But really, all in all, we are absolutely spoiled for choice these days in terms of what the quality of is around you, what you get to enjoy, who you enjoy it with, and how you enjoy it. You know what? Old bottle labels. You sure it is in the future? Ooh, well spotted. Well spotted, Marcus. Let's bring that up a bit closer again. I'm going to zoom in on that so you can. You're right though. It's a bit of that is an old bottle label there on the right. That is very well spotted. That's actually it looks like a festival label or something on the right there. But it's a futuristic looking cask. I mean, they look like lights if you ask me on the front of the cask. I know what that is. So what I want to talk about, one of the themes of course, one of the themes of our August Outturn coming up is about looking to the future and is about taking the timelines of whiskey into perspective. Hey Matt, says someone. Sorry, I can't see all the comments at the moment. I'm trying to get there. Let me just refresh this and see if I can make that work. I don't want to miss out on anyone saying hello. So I really appreciate the comments all coming through, of course. That was from Jeremy. Sorry, Jeremy. How are you, mate? Good to see you. Yes. Greetings to all my friends down in Tassie. You know what? You guys have got it so good at the moment. We're envious of you in New South Wales, and I'm sure even more envious of you in Victoria at the moment with everything that's going on. So where was I? Okay. I want to talk about timelines in whiskey. All too often, when it comes to talking about timelines in whiskey, we forget just how quickly the rate of technological progress and interest in the category has become. I'm going to go to my next slide. This is important. Here we have a very early drawing of the alembic still, or alembic as they would have called it back then, but we call it the alembic still now. And it's the art of passing of condensing vapors off one object to another from hot and cold. Look, it's pretty straightforward. It's pipes and spheres and stuff and water. And this was very early innovations in distillation. And we're talking 1500s here. Like this is, I'm going to get some of my dates wrong. I am not a whiskey historian by any means, but I'm going to get some of the dates wrong. But I want to talk about some of the timelines here. Let's pretend this was about 1500s. This is about 500 years ago. Yes, that's a long time ago. None of us were alive then. Well, none of us were alive then that we know of. And so we often go, well, 500 years is a long time ago. When we look at a whiskey that's, say, 5 years old, see, that's a long time. And I know that it doesn't make any sense saying that because you see on the shelf all the time, Glenfiddich 12 and Balvenie 14 and Craigellachie 17, whatever the whiskey is. Like it's a long time in the cask, and that takes a long time to mature. And I still think that overall, we still seem to take these timelines for granted, that we're drinking single malt whiskey from, in some cases, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or even sometimes 30 years ago, or even more. And that even then, just 30 years ago, was 30 years into a 500-year history of the development of a still in many ways. So let's put this into perspective again. When you have a whiskey that is 30 years of age, what was happening in whiskey 30 years ago? So what was happening in the late 80s, early 90s? I'll tell you, most distilleries were closing. A lot had already closed by then, from like 83 onwards. This was the great sort of the loss of distilleries. Many were closing. It was a glut. They were surplus to needs. There was an oversupply, under demand on whiskey at the time. A lot of distilleries weren't producing a lot of great malt. And that's why a lot of them closed as well. A lot of them closed because the quality of their output just wasn't up to par. By the way, I am taking your comments and questions in the thread. So, drop any of them in. I'll throw them up on screen. It's just a short stream tonight. But I want to talk about how we are often taking these things for granted. At that Vaults event, the Vaults 1682, which is when the Vaults, early era of the Vaults was running. I've done a video on the Vaults before. I'll come back to that. One of the whiskeys I featured on the night was the Welcome Dram, which was this one. I hope you can all see that. Actually, I'm just going to kill off my side screen here for a second. Was this one. It was the Welcome Dram on the night. Thompson's blended Scotch whiskey, gold cap, blended and bottled by J.G. Thompson and Co. Limited, the Vaults, Leith, Scotland. You can probably guess why I used that as the Welcome Dram. It was blended and bottled in the Vaults at Leith, where our spiritual home of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society is. But this was produced well before the society moved in 35 years ago. This was 36 years ago, sorry. Yes, 36 years ago. This was bottled well before then, blended and bottled well before then, because there were businesses operating in there, and it's been in use as a wine cellar and storage and blending of all sorts of things for many centuries, which is very, very cool. So, blended whiskey was king. This was blended and bottled around 1954, 1955. I did a bit of research on it at the time. It just says liquor bottle Scotland on the bottom there. That's rather cool. I'm going to pop that there. I kept onto the empty as a bit of a nice historical curio of something that we opened that night, which was quite nice. It wasn't an amazing whiskey, but it was one that had a certain texture and certain flavor, which I tell you what, if blended whiskey still to this day still tasted like that, it'd be my daily. It'd be absolutely my daily, but it's not. And it doesn't. So that one we have to discount, unfortunately. So my point of mentioning this whole sort of Alembic still thing is that we're as whiskey drinkers, I think we're often taking the resurgence of single malt whiskey a little bit for granted. I have a sip. I'm talking too much. Lovely. Great question. I'm going to, whilst we're in between points here, did many distilleries reopen/open in the 80s or 90s? Yes, many. Some it took a little bit longer, Nick, but a lot were reopening once demand started increasing again. But I'll be honest, from 83 when a lot of them closed up until about 89, 90, a lot of them were still closed by then. Some of them took until 95, 99, some of them to reopen. Our Malt of the Month for August, that distillery didn't reopen until, well, they had all this. I know that's a bad example. They all had all periods of closure, but a lot of them went through different periods and patches of opening and closing at different times. Sorry. Yeah. If different ones came in at different times and different ones opened for different reasons, but they really had to have another reason to open. A lot of these distilleries that closed, by the way, they're only sort of semi-mothballed in that they were closed, but they still had often distillers, friends of the distillery going in, firing up the stills, making sure that nothing was rusting out, keeping things going once a week or once a month or whatever. So yeah, it was a very, very low point in Scotch whisky's history. I'm not here to talk about that particular moment in history because I'm not as worded up on it as I should be tonight. But what I will say is that there's that fascinating history is just one part of the vast sum of us now appreciating single malt whiskey. Single malt whiskey, when this bottle came out, when this bottle was produced, the Thompson's blended Scotch whisky gold cap, that's what whiskey was. There wasn't, this year in 1954, there wasn't any single malt whiskey on the market. None to speak of at the very least. None labeled as such, none labeled as single malt at the very least. They would have called it blended whiskey even coming from one distillery. Yeah, until copper theft got very bad. That's very true, Seamus. There was periods of copper theft. There was all sorts of things. Distilleries were often defaced. Copper was borrowed from some of them. Borrowed, I mean, artfully repurposed, if you like. That's a great. What's this comment here? Hey Matt, if you and Taylor Japanese flipper Owens got in a fight, I'd have my money on you to win that fight. You know what? I'm sure he's a lovely guy. I've never met him, but he certainly likes to arc up a bit online. But good on him. That's not really my scene, so I don't know. I'll take that as in the words of Tony Jones. I'll take that as a comment. James Finnegan says, "Evening, everyone. Good to see you, James. Hope you're well, mate." So, if we're to sort of talk back about the future and the past, what August is kind of focusing on, and this isn't just to talk about Outturn, of course, because Outturn's ages away, but this is the talk for us to say, you know what, we often look at the past and we look at the future, and I think there's the problem of looking in the past and going, oh, things were always better then. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but always that whole sort of like rose tinted glasses thing, like, oh, whiskey was better in the 70s, it was better in the 60s or whatever. That's not true. I don't think that's true at all. I know I'll come to it'll come to fists between Andrew and I on that one. He thinks it was. I think he thinks it was better. Then I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I don't appreciate that. I think it's actually just changed. I think the landscape has changed. I think how we enjoy it has changed, and I think I think that we look back on this and we're just so I think we just need to appreciate how cool it is that not only can we get single malts now at such an available rate, but that even through something like the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, you can get single cask strength single malts from distilleries, which is amazing. Great comment there from I'm going to have to look. Not everyone puts their StreamYard in. That's okay. Othmar says, We wouldn't be drinking Port Ellen or Brora single malts if they weren't surplus to requirements and closed in the early 80s. It's the great irony of it all. I'm also going to add in that Port Ellen was not a fantastically consistent whiskey either. That was one of the other reasons, supposedly, from what I've heard from two different sources, of its closure. It wasn't just surplus. It was also not. It wasn't producing a very good malt, and it wasn't. They were producing a lot of maltings, but they weren't actually making a great lot of whiskey. Their whiskey. The vast majority of it went into blending, as we know. But that's why. And if you try independent or even core range Diageo release Port Ellens, there are some that are great. There are some that are just not great, and the ones that are great, not just not great, are still $5,000 bottles of whiskey. So tread carefully with that kind of stuff. Just because the distillery is closed, my overarching point here is that just because the distillery is closed does not mean that when it was open, it was some beacon of incredible malt that is rare and amazing. Some cases it was. I'd argue that can't think of many Banffs I've had that have been very bad. I'm sure there were some. Thankfully, they haven't been bottled as single malts. I can't think of many Conval malts that I haven't particularly disliked. But I can tell you, I've had a whole bunch of dodgy Glenvore. I've had a whole bunch of dodgy Port Ellen. So look, I mean, Brora was a different story, but there's better Broras than there are Port Ellens. That's all. But it's true though. If it wasn't for those times, then we wouldn't be enjoying what we're doing now. Hence why one of my articles in Outturn in August is about the history of distillation in a nutshell, and why it's important that we look back on this and go, you know what, it wasn't always this good. It really wasn't. You got to remember, this was spirit that was distilled for a long time for therapeutic and pharmaceutical purposes. This is not the purpose was not for great single malt enjoyment. That's my first point. So, well, that's my point tonight. And just that, whiskey times have changed even just in the last 50 years, or in this case, 70 years almost. They've changed so much. The camera's that way. They've changed so much so that, what we get to enjoy now versus got to get to enjoy then are just different propositions. And being able to enjoy a lovely single cask that is nuanced, that is full flavored, is extremely exciting for me. And I know it is for a lot of our members. James, you're highlighting exactly what I'm trying to say here. I'm sure we'll be saying how exciting the whiskey scene is today when we look back at this time in 5 to 10 years. That's always going to happen. That's always going to be roast into glasses. We're all going to go like, oh, how good was, we had such an availability of distillery X, and it was so easy to find, great bottlings of distillery Y. It does, Glen Wonka and Glen Bagpipe, whatever the distilleries are, and wherever they are in the world. And we can just say that there was always that availability of great whiskey in different areas. But at the same time, if you're looking back in 5 to 10 years now, you'll probably be saying you're probably missing out on what's happening now. And while great whiskeys will be passing under your nose, and you might be missing out on them just by thinking, oh, that's not as good as the Lafroig Wonka from 2020. I remember those days. You know what? That's what I'm drinking tonight, by the way. I'm drinking 64.114 Exuberant Bounty of Fruit. It was a 13-year-old single cask bottled for the Society in the sweet, fruity, and mellow profile. And it was a malt of the month. And I'm really enjoying that. That's fantastic. How good was the Vaults dinner? Yeah, Robert, I've got to say that is a highlight for not just for me, being able to host that and taste those whiskeys, but it seems like it was for most guests, if not all guests. We haven't quizzed anyone. The highlight of a real highlight of their Society journey, and that's what I wanted to do on that night, was take people on a journey, a historical journey with great food, great whiskey, great banter, and a great restaurant, no less. So I really appreciate you coming along, Rob. It meant a lot to me, you being there. And I think, as Nick says in this comment as well, how good were in-person tastings back in the day? Yeah. You know what? I'm hoping we'll just call that. We'll write that as. I know everyone's saying, 2020. That's the year. And then next year's gonna be fine. We don't know that. Nothing magically changes at midnight on December 31st except the date. But I'm hoping that this Corona thing could be probably encapsulated to 2020. That'd be nice. That'd be nice. So that sort of leaves me just saying, about technology as it has changed. It's got like I say, still a long way. But I think we're looking at this rapid change now, and we're seeing it, and we're going, yeah, wow. There's a lot of change happening in whiskey now. There was a lot of change happening then, and I think that's the most important part, is that we can say that whiskey as a technology, as a process, and as innovation is still moving. It's not like we've perfected this yet. There's still distilleries around the world creating different shaped stills, creating different types of casks, creating things like, Bota Quarters and ex Chardonnay, and in the stills, in the world of stills, creating things, weird sort of shaped stills that traditional distillers and traditional whiskey drinkers look at and go, no, that's not going to be very good. I like my stills to be a bit more traditional, the Forsyth or the or a Peter Bailey or whatever it is, and looking at a traditional still and going, that's how a whiskey still should be made. No, we only know that's how they're supposed to be made because that's how we've all been learning off other distilleries and copying what they do, and that's fine. But I'm saying every so often there's outliers to that, and those people sometimes create something that might be really interesting and worth having a look at. And I say the same when it comes to whiskey. I get really passionate about this. It's the same when it comes to whiskey and opening great bottles and going, oh, well, I had no idea this distillery could taste like this. I had no idea the complexities of that single cask could shine that strongly. And I think that's a really interesting point in that respect, because that's going to get my way. Because it's so important to open what you get and enjoy it, because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And second of all, it's just a case of saying, there's so much interesting whiskey out there being made by interesting distilleries, some of which you'll spot in August Outturn. Boom! I remember places. Oh, I remember places too. And James says that's why it's important to open and enjoy the whiskies of today for the drams they are. That's right. If you just get too wrapped up in the past, chasing those ever more expensive, rare things that were fantastic back in the day, there's fantastic back in today being made as well. That's my little rant for tonight, is that technology is always changing, the timeline is moving, and innovation is always still happening in whiskey. And that's why it's important for us to use that as say, you know what, we don't know everything yet. And in 100 years, we can still say we don't know everything yet. The alchemy of distillation, the interesting single casks, the adventures that your events can take you on, whether they be online or in person, is part of the magic of the whiskey community. It's part of the magic of the whiskey fabric of being someone who's invested in flavor, someone who's interested in taking that journey and discovering things and making experiences that takes you back and forth through time and through place and through your mind. That's beautiful. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Irina says, I only drink whiskey from copper pot stills and not column because I'm precious. You know what? You're going to miss out on some great whiskeys then, Irina. Come on. I know you're probably pulling my leg. I sure hope you are, because there is great whiskey to be made out of column stills. I've talked about grain whiskey before. I might do another session on it. Grain whiskey is the underrated underdog of the whiskey world. And I think, people often think of grain whiskey as somewhat less interesting or less complex. It's not. It's just different. We had a great question at last week's roundtable on Wednesday night with Andy Milne, Scott Fitzsimons, Alex Dallenberg. There was a great question from, I think it was from Caleb, asked, is corn as a grain in distillate, is that less is that less complex than malted barley, than barley as a grain? And the short answer is no. It's just different. To claim one is more complex than the other requires at this level a huge amount of subjectivity. And that's not really what the question was. So there is a lot of work going on at places like the Scotch Whisky Research Institute that I've talked about before in dissection of flavors, in understanding of compounds, which is fantastic. And it can get really nerdy and it can really suck the fun out of whiskey sometimes. But at the same time, I find it really fun because I get to share these insights with you and what our panel's working on, and saying there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. Rob Aker says, is there any more G's in the way? Yes, Rob, one or two more this year. One or two, and they're quite old. Not super old, but one's 29 years old, I think, and one's 24 years old. Anyway, some lovely 20-year-old grains. Darren says, lots of irony tonight. 2020 will be one of the most memorable years of the 21st century. We'll always remember this year. If it wasn't for Diageo, the Ellen Maltings would have closed killing off Isla Whisky. Many don't like Diageo. No idea why they saved Isla. Irony rules. You know what? I have no disrespect for Diageo. I love what they do. We work very closely with them as a society in cask supply, in spirit supply. Full respect to Diageo. Really love how those guys work. Just because they're the big guys doesn't mean you have to hate them. Balcones corn whiskey, amazing. Exactly, Darren. This is my point. There's great whiskey, and we had a 140.1 last year. The cornography from Balcones Distillery, fantastic whiskey, fantastic. I might just have a bottle of that squirreled away. I don't think so though. No, I don't. But we have one in our warehouse, and I'm going to use it at a tasting. The end. When we can do tastings again, because I'm not putting that one into a virtual pack. But I will give you one preview from Outturn, because I got asked heaps, what's in Outturn? Can we give us some teasers, some hints, some what's going on at Outturn? I'll show you. So there's my article on the Alembic still and some of the history of whiskey. But there's also Sublime Nectar. Here we go. This is the big daddy-o of Outturn. I'm going to start from the top down when talking about Outturn over the next couple of weeks. 24.140. It is limit of one per member. And it is a Speyside sherry butt, a refill sherry butt, a 30-year-old whiskey, distilled September 1989, 50.4%, and only 12 bottles here. Now, here it is, the Sublime Nectar, a mesmerizing, sweet and floral, yet extremely delicate scent bewitched us, and we felt we'd fall under a spell. Veil-like aromas of rose petals, peach orchids, orange blossom, marzipan, and summer fruit liqueur emerged, and much later, we slow-cooked succulent braised venison. The taste neat was simply sublime, like a scoop of thick New Zealand Manuka honey, with characteristics of earthy, oily, herbaceous, and florid-rich, complex flavor. Diluted with a drop of water, the aroma turned to butterscotch, rosewater, mead, palette of strawberry orange melange, served over vanilla ice cream and garnished with mint sprigs. Boom! So there you go. You wanted a bit of a preview of what's coming. That's the big daddy in Outturn. That's one of the Vaults collection releases with the full box and everything. Incredible release, that one. Just incredible. So we'll reveal all the pricing and everything soon. We're not quite there with that yet. But it's a Sublime Nectar is that one, 24.140. That's the, like I say, the big daddy in Outturn, the true rarity. It's a 30-year-old whiskey from probably the most renowned sherried whiskey producer on earth by a long shot. They've been doing sherried whiskies longer than some distilleries have even thought about what sherry casks are, and they've been doing them very, very, very well. Yes, you are going to have to sell a leg to get that one, Rowan. It's you're gonna have to sell a child. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that, but whatever works. Are the Alembic producers still using Alembic? There are some people out there, Rob, who are still using the old school Alembic still. Not in whiskey production, but in eau de vie mostly, and it's quite cool to see. There's a few distilleries in the Middle East and a few in China that still use it, which is the origins of that still. I couldn't name those distilleries for you off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but they are eau de vie distilleries. I've seen photos and videos of them. Incredible stuff, but it's uncommon. Let's put it that way. I'm going to leave it there for tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along this half-hour episode that we like to do, and tonight was just the Monday chat, like I said. Tomorrow I've got a special guest, which shall be announced shortly. He's an absolute stalwart of the of Australian whiskey industry, and someone who I've been keen to get on the show. And actually, it's funny, tomorrow night I've got a great interview, and then next Tuesday I've got a great interview, which will all be revealed. But Thursday night, of course, is with our Cellar Master. We're tasting the welcome pack, the membership pack here, just for a live virtual tasting. Come along. Oh, events. Mark, yes, there are some events in Outturn and some being announced outside of Outturn that didn't make the print run for Outturn. So Tassie's on that list. Sydney's on that list. Melbourne, I'm sorry, can't really do anything there at the moment. Although keep an eye on Whisky and Helmet. They're going to be doing some society juice bags soon, so keep an eye out for those. And Brisbane has an event coming up as well, and nothing in Perth just yet, but keep Perth and Hobart, keep your ears peeled, because that'll be announced probably just the week after. And so we're looking forward to those. Really exciting, Mark. I'm looking forward to having seeing you at one of our events back in Hobart. To be honest, I want to get back down there. Okay, I'm going to see you all for now, and stay good, and I'll catch you all tomorrow night. No, tomorrow night. Special guest for tomorrow night. I almost forgotten. There you go. No, I hadn't. There you go. Okay, bye.